Okay, welcome to Lab 6. Question 1. If Japan removed its trade barriers so that the Japanese consumers could buy rice at the world price, the Japanese consumers would be better off and the Japanese rice farmers would be worse off. If we add in gains and losses, there would be a net gain. Japanese rice farmers would make a greater effort in lobbying against the reduction in trade barriers because their losses are more concentrated than the gains to consumers. Question 2. If Japan eliminated its trade barriers to rice, the number of workers employed in the rice-producing industry in Japan would fall. Over the next year or so, many rice farmers would lose their jobs and most likely face unemployment. I do think they will work again, however, it will take time for them to adapt and overcome. Question 3. These bumper stickers are the result of imported automobiles and show the public's discontent with the impact of imported vehicles on domestic companies. Domestic auto companies and their workers are hurt by imported automobiles, while domestic buyers and the foreign auto companies benefit.
For question 4, a likely reason why these stickers don't exist, the kinds that say that you're losing money from taxing imported sugar, is because the public does not necessarily want to get mixed up in the politics of trade taxes. Therefore, these stickers are disconnected from the public since they are more likely to focus what's on the shelf and not actually what goes on behind the scenes with the import trade taxes. Question 5, Part A, the price ceilings create shortages. Part B, this horizontal line in figure 9.1 represents the world price for the traded good and not the shortages. For C, there is no reason to buy any more of the inexpensive good since the demand is already met. Buying any more of it would likely result in it being devalued or the global price increasing. For question 6, this is the graph we've made in accordance to the instructions that was in part A through C, labeling QS, QD, the domestic production, domestic consumption, and the difference between QS and QD is actually exports this time because the domestic supply is more than the domestic demand. However, for part D, the domestic airplane buyers would pay a higher price as shown on the graph and buy a lower quantity, that is QD, than if there was no free trade. And for E, therefore, domestic airplane buyers are likely to not support free trade or oppose it.
So for question 7, it talks about the idea of wanting to buy products locally. And if we take that idea to its conclusion, there's going to be tons of lost supply in specific areas because the area isn't specialized. So there's going to be a high opportunity cost in producing maybe some things that the area is not suited for, and they may not be able to acquire as many products as the consumers would like because the products that it's not good at, they won't make enough of, or the products that are have a high demand, they won't make enough of for the consumers. For question 8, it asks, for part A, it asks which part of the graph is the increase in producer surplus gained by U.S. steel producers. That's going to be C because now the price is increased, so the producers will have a larger producer surplus. For part B, it asks what part of the graph is the loss in consumer surplus. So that's going to be parts C, D, F, and G because now the price is increased, so the consumers have to pay a higher price. For part C, the tax revenues from the tariff are going to be E and F. And then for part D, the lost gains from trade is G because now the consumers have to pay a higher price. And then that causes a lower demand. And then the wasted resources is going to be part D because now the price has been increased. For question 9, it asks to calculate all these values in dollars. So for part A, it's just going to be C. So that's going to be 650.25 million. For part B, it's going to be the sum of C, D, E, F, and G, and that's going to equal 841 million. And then for part C, it's going to be E and F, which equals 144.5 million. And then for part D, the loss gains is G, so that's 25.5 million. And then the wasted resources is D, so that's going to be 21.25 million. So the deadweight loss due to high cost producers is going to be 21.25 million, which is the wasted resources. And then the loss gains is 25.5, which is the deadweight loss from underconsumption. So the deadweight loss from underconsumption is going to be a larger percentage of the total deadweight loss than the loss due to high cost producers.
So for question 10, you can see that the blue dot, for question 10A, you can see that the blue dot represents the tariff equilibrium, the red dot represents the free trade equilibrium, the wasted resources is represented by area B, the lost gains from trade represented by area C, and the tariff revenue is represented by area D in the graph. So for part B, under the quota system, area D represents the additional profits that flow to the importers, and therefore the importers would prefer a quota to a tariff as they get more profit. The right to export sugar at a lower tariff is very valuable to everyone, and so therefore there will most likely be a political process to determine which firms obtain the rights to export, as it will be the government that decides which companies get this tariff reduction. The way the sugar quota is allocated around the world could result in a lot of waste. There is no guarantee that the lowest cost firm will be the firm to win the quota, and it might go to more political reasons. So for question 11, for part A, looking at the table, I'm looking at the figure, you can see that it will be cheaper to produce in Kazakhstan, and it is valued more in the US, and by it I'm talking about the flaxseed. For part B, we can see the table that represents the imports and exports of flaxseed in the two countries. And for part C, we can see that the price would be, the world price between the two countries would be $10, and the quantity traded between the two countries would be 4 million bushels. For part D, the buyers of flaxseed in Kazakhstan will be harmed as they have a reduction in their consumer surplus. The sellers of flaxseed in Kazakhstan will be helped as they have an increase in their producer surplus. The buyers of flaxseed in the United States will be helped as they have an increase in their consumer surplus, and the sellers of flaxseed in the United States will be harmed as they have a reduction in their consumer surplus. And then for part E, trade will be mitigated as there would be and there will be a increase in the producer surplus in the United States and a reduction in the consumer surplus. The deadweight loss generated by this tariff will be $4 million. Thank you for listening, and this has been our lab.